I realized I had no control over that, and I had no freedom. I was a slave to a system. There was nothing I could do about it, and so I began to say, okay, I'm a man of faith and belief in God, and I was like, okay, God, where have I gone wrong? Where have I stepped into stupid here and done something I shouldn't have been doing? And I realized I was just following the herd mentality. I was just doing what everybody else was doing, and as Nelson Nash, our mentor, used to say, if you want different results, you got to do differently than everybody else does.
Today, we have with us Mr. Scott Chapman. He's a fellow IBC practitioner certified by the Nelson Nash Institute. And I was very fortunate that Mr. Chapman actually reached out to me a few weeks ago and invited me down to Statesboro, Georgia, where I attended one of his day seminars at a local college. And I got the opportunity and privilege to listen to his background, his story, how he knew Nelson Nash personally through the years. And then what I think is really going to resonate with a lot of our members isn't just that history, but it's also how he's personally used this strategy in business. So as a certified practitioner, and you know that we're very adamant that you do work with a strategist, we thought it'd be good to have someone who's been in the business a little bit longer than us to kind of communicate and share his story with y'all today. So with that, Mr. Chapman, we usually like to start the episodes off with two truths and a lie. Right now, I am being beat considerably bad by Jason. So I'm hoping you throw a couple curveballs to Jason's way, a couple softballs to me. And if you give us two truths, one lie, we're going to try to figure out which one is the fib.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Jason. So two truths and a lie. Let's see here. So, all right. So I have been married for 30 years. When I was born by flashlight because the electricity was out at that time. And Johnny Appleseed, also known as John Chapman, was my great, 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 great uncle.
All
Those
right.
were good, Scott. Those were
Yeah, very
good.
good.
Well, in honorable fashion, I'm gonna let Mr. Jeremy Huggins go first, because with the lead I have, it wouldn't be fair if I went first.
Okay. I'm going to go with the lie being the flashlight. So I don't believe that you were born by flashlight. I'm going to go that the Johnny Appleseed is just too far-fetched. I'm going to have to say that's true because it's just like, I mean, who would lie about that, right? So that's what I'm going with. The flashlight is the lie. Jason.
I like it, Jeremy. I like it. And I'm gonna actually go as vanilla as it was. I kind of feel like you didn't put much emphasis and detail into being married for 30 years. There wasn't much passion there. So I think that is off in numbers. And I think the other two are actually true because of the amount of detail and a little weirdness on the last one. That was pretty interesting. So,
Okay. So now you're ready for me to do.
yes, now you got to tell us where we stand in our competition here.
Yeah, so both of you are wrong.
Oh,
Oh, wow. Okay. Jeremy, how's that work? I guess we don't get any points at all.
hey, that's fine. It just means I'm not losing as bad, right? So I'm still where I
Yeah,
was the week prior.
yeah. So much to your dismay, Jason, I have been married 30 years, and I am very glad about that. I just intentionally did it that way to kind of throw you off a little bit. So I've been married. December was 30 years to my bride. Of her name is Tess, and she is the mother of my two children, Zeke and Zeb. So I was born by flashlight, Jeremy. I definitely was. But Johnny Appleseed, to my knowledge, is no relation to me whatsoever. So
Well, I asked who would lie about it, and I guess we found out who would lie about that. So thanks.
Well, I already like the energy. I already like the energy at Scott's Brigade, and I'm just curious, Zeke and Zeb. Like, how did you and Tess come up with Zeke and Zeb? Before
yeah,
we
and we're
dive into,
not
I'm just curious.
right. We're not Mennonites. A lot of people say, "Are y'all Mennonites?" Because Zeke and Zeb or like that. So good question. So my granddad, his nickname was Zeke, and I never knew him. He died a couple of years before I was born. So he's been dead for about 58 years because I'm 56. And I never knew him, but he was well known in our community, in our county. He was a furniture maker and made some really, really cool cabinets and furniture and stuff. And so when we got married and a couple of years later found out we were pregnant, we were just talking about names. And Zeke came up. I never knew my granddad, and said, I'd like to if we have a boy, name him Zeke and honor my granddad. So I went and sat with my grandmother and asked her for her permission to do that, and she said absolutely. So we actually named him. This will throw you off even more, because going back to the question, are we minutes? We named him Levi Ezekiel, and we call him Zeke. So, so not only is it not really his name, it's his middle. It's based off of his middle name. So all through school he would get called Levi, and then he'd go, no, it's actually Zeke. So, and then Zeb, there again, just looking for another Z name just to kind of keep it going. So no family story to that one. And his name is Zebediah Lee. And Zeb's actually the one, he's the younger. He'll be 23 Thursday. And he's the one that's actually in the business with me. And Zeke is the owner of Magnolia Loom that we'll talk about a little later here.
Awesome.
I like that context you just set for us. So thanks for sharing the names and the stories. And
Yeah.
it's no, I can hear your passion of being a dad and how proud you are of your sons. And the Z names, I'm glad, because your last name's Chapman, so they were probably still in the front of the line, lining up in line growing up, unless the teacher decided like, hey, let's go by first name. And then man, your kids are probably like, well, my name's Ezekiel. My name's Ezekiel.
That's right.
Or Levi. Put me Levi, put me up front.
Yeah.
So
No doubt.
So Scott, before you got into, sharing the good word and everything with infinite banking that we're all passionate about, you were a general contractor, right? You were developing homes with your father. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, in 1994, I went to my dad and we talked about it, and we opened up a general contracting company. There again, here in Washington County, Georgia, small rural county. Started off small, and over the years it grew quite large. We were building mostly new commercial. I mean, mostly new homes, mostly residential, but some light commercial, construction as well. We did a little bit of remodeling, but 90% of what we did was new construction on the residential side. And we built, if it was a county that bordered Washington County, Georgia, we built in it, did a lot of building around Lake Sinclair and Lake Oconee. And we grew that business over time, and to where we were doing, in the heyday of our construction business, we were doing 5 million, 6 million a year in revenue in the early 2000s in that day's prices, which, if you inflate it to today's numbers, would be much bigger numbers. So yeah, we had a good thing going.
So what happened? Was it 2008 or well, why are you not in contracting anymore?
Yeah, this thing called 2008 happened. The housing bubble, the real estate bubble, that happened, and it changed everything. We had no, I was 40 years old when '08 happened, and like most people, had my head stuck in the sand. A lot of people still do today, not realizing what was really going on. Knew that something was happening. In '06, we began to see some things kind of shifting in the market and beginning to happen. But Barney Frank promised us on the floor of Congress at that time, and you guys may be too young to remember who Barney Frank was. He promised us that there was no housing bubble coming, that it was just impossible. It was not going to happen in 2006. And but we knew something was happening. In '07, the IRS and George Bush came out with this thing called the First Time Homebuyers Tax Credit, and we can talk about that if we want to, with the lie that it was. Anyway, time went on and things began to get worse, and then we were knee deep in residential subdivision development, speculative building, just like everybody else at that time. If it was being done, we were doing it. No clue, no idea, what was really going on. Kind of like the iceberg, you see 15% above the water, it's the 85% below the surface that sunk the Titanic, and we had no idea about the 85% that caused the issues and led up to what happened in '08.
Can you walk us through just a little bit? Because I know this is going to lead into what's been your passion since that time. But can you kind of walk us through a little what it was like to to have things start going the other way? Like you guys are winning, you're making 5 to 6 million a year, right, in revenue. Like you're probably employing a bunch of people. You guys have a lot of projects. You have a lot of momentum.
Yep.
You feel
Yep.
like everything's possible because everything's
Right.
going your way. But
Yep.
what did it feel like when it started to slide the other way? When you started to see, like now you're talking about the things that were put in place that you weren't even aware of were in place. But since you
Right.
study what we study, now you know the details. But what did it feel like back in '08 when you were 40? Like you have young kids, like, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were living the American dream, mortgages and new cars and kids in private school and, whatever. So we were living the American dream. And you know, an interesting thing, and I'll say this to answer your question. I had a good friend who, still a good friend, fortunately, but several years prior to '08, he and I had a conversation. He worked for a local industrial company that kept going through '08 and everything else. And he told me one day that he had always wanted to go into the contracting business, and he would love to have an opportunity someday. So in probably 2002, I went back to him and I said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to hire someone to kind of be a supervisory role, a project manager, if you will. Would you be interested?" And so we began to talk about it, and he got real interested, and so he ended up leaving a job that he'd been on for 20 years, very stable job. I mean, corporate, and blue collar position, but still he was, nothing to worry about. And I told him when I hired him, I said, "Now, I don't know. I had no idea that '08 was coming, but I said, anything could happen and cause this to not work out." And little did I know that just about 5 years later, that was going to be happening. And I had to, had to lay him off and others. But yeah, we had all kind of stuff going on. We had, 6 to 8 jobs going on at a time, developing subdivisions and stuff. And so when that began to happen, really in 2006 was when I began to get a feeling. But I was somewhat naive, Jason. I mean, I was 38 years old. I'd always thought, hey, the government's for us, not against us, and they're gonna look out for us and not let anything bad happen. But as I began to see that unfolding, and I began to have hard conversations with people and laying them off of jobs, and tell them, that we couldn't keep going. I had never had to do that before. Like I said, I was young and it was hard to do. And it was hard to look at somebody that's older than I am, that's depending on that check for their family, and tell them, hey, your job's over, it's done, and no more. And I actually waited too long to do that because I was actually using my money that I had put aside for my family,
Mm.
injecting it into my business, trying to keep it going because surely this was going to turn around quickly, And so it was really, it was a surreal time in my life and our family's life. My dad was in it with me. My dad also was a cabinet builder, a cabinet maker, and he's 80 years old now. But he had put a lot into it as well. And so it was just something, I mean, it didn't feel good having to have those conversations with people and watching something that we had built literally, fading away, and there was no control. We had no control. There was nothing we could do to change it, stop it, keep it from happening. And my plan was when we started that business, and as I approached 40 years old, my plan was when I turned 50, I'd be able to retire and walk away from it, probably sell my business. We had a showroom set up. I mean, we had about a 2,000 square foot showroom plus office space where people would come in and make decisions and choices from stuff to go in their home, pick everything out, cabinets, lighting, flooring, paint, you name it, fixtures. And so I was building it to sell and be able to walk away and do what I wanted to.
So,
And then all
so
that
that
changed.
2008, that crisis hit, and you guys, it sounds like pretty much lost it all, laying everyone off, your entire staff. How did that crisis influence your perspective on financial control and independence?
Yeah. So great question. And so yeah, we laid everyone off. I started doing whatever I had to do to pay the bills and to keep things going. But I'm a pretty inquisitive person. I don't only want to know what happened, I want to know why it happened. And I'm not a control freak, but I don't like feeling like I have no ability to do something about what is happening, especially when it comes to the well-being of my family. And at that moment, like I said, my boys were, I think, were 6 and 11 or something like that. And like I said, we had all the stuff going on that, everybody else in America and middle America had going on, with everything. And so I realized I had no control over that, and I had no freedom. I was a slave to a system. There was nothing I could do about it. And so I began to say, okay, I'm a man of faith and belief in God. And I was like, okay, God, where have I gone wrong? Where have I stepped into stupid here and done something I shouldn't have been doing? And I realized I was just following the herd mentality. I was just doing what everybody else was doing. And as Nelson Nash, our mentor, used to say, if you want different results, you got to do differently than everybody else does. And having true freedom and independence doesn't come from mass behavior, doesn't come from doing what everyone else is doing. It really does come from different habits, different behavior, different beliefs that lead to different results. And so I realized that there had to be a better way, that there had to be something different that I could do to be free and to have independence, not only for me and my family today, but for future generations of my family.
So how did that lead you into infinite banking and what it is you're doing today?
I want to know how you met. I want to know how you met Nelson. Like, how did it lead you? Because it wasn't as prevalent and easy to find and research and get the information. So, like, being inquisitive, how did you even get there? Like, that must
Yeah,
have
yeah.
been me from Statesboro or from Georgia, from the small, little town you're in Georgia. Like, how did you even find this?
Right. So one Sunday at church, a gentleman who's about 20 years older than I am, maybe 25 years older than I am, came up to me, and I had moved, we had closed our showroom and I had moved to just a small office facility. And he said, Scott, where can I find you tomorrow? And I want to bring you a book. And I said, okay. And so I told him where my office was in. He said, I'll come see you tomorrow morning before lunch. I said, that's fine. So Bill comes to see me that morning, and he walks in my office, and he has a book in his hand, and he lays it on my desk. And this is the exact copy of that book right here, The
Mm.
Creature
Creature of
from
Jekyll
Jekyll
Island.
Island. And he said, Scott, I want you to read this book. Now, y'all are shaking your head. You know the book, but you see
Mm-hmm.
there's 600 pages in this book. Now, I don't say this to sound braggadocious whatsoever. I say it with my head hung, but I was 40 years old and I had not read 600 pages since college. Okay, so I was not a reader. And I realize now what that, I'm a reader now. I love to read, but Bill brought me that book, and I said, what is this? The Creature from Jekyll Island. Man, I used to go to Jekyll Island all the time as a kid. We vacationed there, and I said, what is this Federal Reserve? What is this all about? I think I've heard of that before, but what is it? So anyway, Bill said, read this book. So I took some time and I made my way through that book. And as I began to read that book, it just like made me feel sick, made me feel kicked in the gut, made me feel betrayed. It made me feel dirty. Like, okay, I get it. Here's what happened. Here's the problem. And it really is historically documented. Like I said, I don't want to know just the what, I want to know why. So when I got through reading that book, Tess and I loaded up and we went to Jekyll Island. And I went to the Jekyll Island Club Hotel, and I walked the grounds where the Rockefellers and the Morgans and the Rothschilds and all those people walked, the Goodyears and all those. I walked there and I went in. They had a museum there. They still have it, but they've remodeled it, redone it completely. But the old history museum at Jekyll Island used to have this story painted on the wall in murals around there so I said, okay, what G. Edward Griffin wrote about in this book was accurate and true. And so I said, okay, now I know the problem. What do I do with this? What do I do now? Well, a little later on in that same year, this was 2009, another guy unrelated to that conversation with Bill, a friend of mine from out of town, he said, hey, I'm going to get a book for you and send it to you. And I said, okay. He said, you really need to read this, and this might be something you want to even do for people. And this book showed up. Okay. Now, that book showed up, and as I said, what is this, becoming your own banker? Man, I'm broke. What am I doing here? But I sat down with it and I read it on a Sunday afternoon, and I was like, okay, let me go back and read this again. So I went back and read it again, but before I started reading it that time, I flipped to the back of it and on page, I think it's 91. Yep, right here in the middle of 91, right there, where Nelson has a list of suggested readings. Guess what one of those is?
Jekyll
The
Island.
Creature of Jekyll Island.
Creature from Jekyll Island. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, Lord, this is not just coincidental. You're telling me something here. There's a bigger picture here. Help me see it and get it and understand it. Well, what I began to realize is I gave the Nelson's book the second reading. I had discovered I had the issue, the housing bubble bursting, and that causing the problems for my family and others as well all over the country. Then I found out the problem through reading The Creature from Jekyll Island. And in my hand, I held the solution in Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. And so all the pieces began to come together there. So to your question, Jason, I wanted to know more because how do I do this? Because like you said, I mean, social media it was there, but it wasn't a big thing. There weren't these videos and all this stuff. How do I find out? So on the back right here, it gives a phone number. And so I called this phone number to try to get a hold of this Nelson Nash guy over in Birmingham, Alabama. And guess what? I got a hold of him. And we had a conversation and I told him my story and he was like, Scott, you need to get to one of my seminars. And I said, well, seminar, you doing one in Georgia? And he said, no, I'm doing one in Birmingham in February. And this was late in the year. And so anyway, I ended up going to that seminar, but prior to that, as I began to learn about Nelson Nash was born 50 miles north of where I live, where I'm sitting right now, straight up Highway 15, 50 miles from here. Nelson Nash was born in Greensboro, Georgia. He grew up in Athens, Georgia, and he ended up spending part of his life in eastern North Carolina, but the majority of it in Birmingham, Alabama. And guess what? He is a Georgia Bulldog football fan. He graduated from UGA with a forestry degree, right? So we had a lot in common. There you go. There you go. So we hit it off great, and he said you've got to get to my seminar in February. So mind you, I was scraping bottom financially. I was doing all I could to make ends meet for my family to put groceries on the table. And here Nelson is telling me I need to come to Birmingham. Well, that's gas, food, and a hotel, right? And I really didn't need to spend that money, but I wanted to know. I realized what I had in my hand, and I wanted to know more. And so my wife and Zeb and myself, Zeb was, like I said, 5 or 6 years old, loaded up and made the trip to Birmingham. And that's where I met Nelson and sat through what he used to do as about a day and a half long seminar. Not really a day and a half, but 3 hours on Friday evening and all day on Saturday. And that was how I got to know him and find out more about the infinite banking concept.
So neither myself nor Jason have had the privilege of meeting Nelson Nash in person. Can you give us a little bit about what that experience is like meeting him? Everyone I've talked to just talk with such reverence about the man, what he's done, not just as helping folks, break free, becoming their own banker, but literally who he was as a person. Can you give us a little more insight of him?
Absolutely. I think to your point, Jeremy, as great of a thing as Nelson put in place with the infinite banking concept and what it allowed him to do, and what, more importantly, what it has allowed people like the three of us and countless others across the country to do to help people. The most important thing about Nelson Nash was the man that he was. Nelson's been dead now. Tomorrow, let's see, Thursday will be 6 years. I think it was March the 27th. It was my son Zeb's birthday. So he died in 2019. But he was 87, I think, when he died. So I had known him for 9 years at that time. And here's one of the things that one of the questions I had as I read this book. In here, he uses scripture and biblical references throughout the book, and you'll know that if you've read it. Not overpowering, but just periodically he will use, those type things. And people do that for one of two reasons. They either do it because they're real and genuine in it, or they do it just to try to boast it, build themselves up and get people's attention and make them think and believe there's something they're not. Well, I didn't know Nelson, so I was wondering which one of those it was. Okay. So still, even after talking to him about coming to Birmingham, I was just not sure. So when I got to Birmingham on that Friday afternoon and went into that seminar on that Friday evening, my question got answered because we sat in that room. There was probably about 70 or 80 people in a room at a Hilton hotel there in Birmingham. And Nelson said, okay, we're going to be here 3 hours tonight. And in about an hour, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back for an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of content. And then we'll be done until tomorrow morning. So he went through kind of an introductory, and at the end of the hour, when we got ready to take a break, Nelson said, all right, it's break time. He said, let me tell you something before we go to break. And Nelson was very dry, very pointed. You've heard him on videos. Y'all watched some of his video series, and he would say something that was funny, and he would give that little laugh, and then he'd keep right on going. And so anyway, he got real serious for a minute. He said you're going to learn a lot of really cool, life-changing stuff tonight and tomorrow, stuff that will make a difference for you and your family as long as you're alive here on this earth for generations yet to come. He said, but there's one thing that he said that won't matter the day you die. He said there's one thing that if you don't have right when you go into eternity, then you're not going to end up where you want to. And he said that's whether or not you know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. He said, if you don't have that right, come see me during this break and let's get that right so everything else in your life will be right as well. And so I sat there because that was one of the questions I had. Remember, my question was he genuine in his biblical references in that book? So my question was fully and completely answered, not only about that, but about the man he was and what he really stood for, the truth that he stood on, because 70 or 80 people in a room, he didn't know many of them. People had paid to be there, all right? And he could have made 20 of them mad, right? By saying that. And they could have not wanted to come back. But I want you to know everybody returned to their seat when that break was over with. And I realized the genuine man of everything about him that he was at that moment.
So he was grounded in faith, and that's kind of like the foundation. We always talk about on this podcast, we're going to talk about the taboo subjects, right? We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about politics, and we're going to talk about religion. And it seems like right here, two of those three subjects really resonated with you. It was money and it was faith. And
Right.
learning and studying underneath Nelson Nash, how did that transform, I guess, your thought process, not just about where you were, a financial system that failed you and you lost it all, but can you give us a little bit more insight on like how you really got onto the journey? You attended this seminar, you saw that he was genuine, he was resonating with you on a faith-based level. What was that next step?
So as Saturday ended that weekend, Nelson came up to me and he said, so what are you going to do? And I said, what do you mean? He said, so what's next for you? And I said, I don't know. It was kind of like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, it was, I'd read the book, here's the man, and he said, you need to do this for your family and for others. And in that seminar, it was sponsored by a gentleman named Justin Kraft and Charlie Nowlin with Nowlin and Associates in Birmingham. And I had met Justin, and he said, if you decide you want to do this, either as a client or a practitioner or whatever, he said, you let me know and we'll help you out. So Nelson, living right there in Birmingham, knew Justin and them, and he said, great people, you need to be leaning on them and talking to them. So over the next month, I was asking myself that question you just asked. What do I do now? What next? How do I make this transition? Is this what I want to do? How do I do it? So Nelson and I traded emails and a couple phone calls. And at about the end of 30 days past being at that seminar, Nelson said one day on a phone call, he said, Scott, you get this, you've lived it, you understand it better than most people out there that have been doing it for a while, because this is real to you and your family. You've lived the problem, you have the solution in your hands. You need to start doing this for your family, and you need to start doing it to help others. And he knew that I was capable of thinking differently. And as y'all know, that's big with Nelson, that you have to be able and willing to think differently, because you got to be able to form different habits and different beliefs in order to have those different results I mentioned earlier. So he told me, he said, if you don't call Justin Kraft, I'm going to call him for you and tell him that you want to do this. So I hung up and said, okay, I'll call him. So I didn't call Justin that day. I called him the next day. And I called him and I said, I told him who it was, and he said, yeah, Nelson Nash called me yesterday and said you would be calling. So he knew I was going to call. So I did. I called and talked to Justin, and as they kind of say, the rest is history from our relationship. Been with them now since 2010, not only as a client but as a practitioner. Of course, at that time there was no authorized practitioner program. It didn't come along until 2013. But yeah, it was just a matter of being willing. I think I was at a point. It was a watershed moment, an epiphany, if you will, in my life. And I was ripe. I was searching. I was seeking. I knew there was a problem, so I knew there had to be a solution, as Jason said at the
And
beginning.
Scott, thank you for sharing your faith and your story and your belief. And just for people listening to this, just to give some context, right? We're talking about how Scott found, what the problem was, right? The recession of 2008, 2009, and then what led him, to going from making 5 to 6 million a year to now needing another solution. Like really understand there was a major problem that needed addressing. And the thing that I'm really, I guess, aware of in the moment, and that's not the word I'm looking for, but was your courage and your faith and your belief. And a lot of people get to this point where you've spoken to lots and lots of people through the time you've been serving people. Jeremy and I have as well. And it really comes down to Nelson talking about how it's imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy. And on top of that, it's faith. Like you have to believe that this will work for you. And like you were in scarcity. Like I can't pay for gas. I can't pay for food. How am I going to how's my wife I'm supposed to be providing and protecting going to believe in me that I'm going to go down this other thing that I don't even really know where it's going to bring me? But something tells me this is right. Something draws me to this. Something draws me to Nelson the man, to the energy of faith. Because I wonder often, like, why, and this is, I guess, maybe a question before we move on, but why don't more people that are living the current system, that are putting all their money in all these different buckets, that believe in what they've been sold, right? As far as 401ks, HSAs, all these other government devised plans, 529s, whatever they may be. Like, why don't people see the truth when it's so simple? Like, why do you think that is with your experience?
Well, Nelson was big about talking about the noise that's out there and being able to listen through the noise, and being able to hear through the noise, being able to see the unseen, hear the unheard. And I think people, there again, that it's so much easier to be a part of the herd. It's so much easier to be a part of the crowd. So much easier to stay on that broad path. And so someone has to be ripe and ready to have this conversation. And many people are. They just don't realize they are. And so, when you sit down and just have a one-on-one conversation with someone, sometimes I'll ask people, so, what do you think about, and you mentioned, well, let me say this, you mentioned earlier, faith, money, and politics. Politics plays into this because politics is involving government, and you just mentioned government plans, Jason. So it all comes together, right?
Yeah,
We
it's
know
all
it
the
all
same
does.
thing. We're saying it's all the same thing.
Exactly,
Anybody's listening.
exactly. Yeah, 100%. So it all comes, you got to have somebody that's on the right track there as well, that understands there's some problems going on in our country, in our political system, and in our government. And even though if you look over my shoulder, you see a document that was signed by 56 men hanging over my shoulder here, the Declaration of Independence. There you go. Yep. And so, those men declared independence for us, and we've just let that independence just get sucked right back away from us again and there's a system out there that we've got to secede from again. But when you sit down and you start having conversations with people, I just ask them, hey, tell me, you as a person, forget about what you hear on television. What do you, Jason, what do you, Jeremy, think about what's going on in our country and has been going on for the last 20 years, because that's probably most people's memorable time frame, from a financial and economic perspective? What do you think? Where are we headed as a country? What do you think it's going to look like 20 years from now? And I just let people open up and start talking and have that conversation. And then, get them to think about, okay, based on what you're saying and what you're telling me, does your behavior, how you're saving, investing, planning for the future, does that behavior reflect what you just said your beliefs are? And help them understand, because regardless of what they're currently doing financially, and hopefully they're doing something, I never condemn what they're doing. I just want them to understand how their habits line up with their beliefs, and are they headed apart or are they headed together? And if we can help them understand that and get that, then it opens up a bigger picture conversation to, okay, maybe something you're doing is part of the problem that you already know exists, what that's going to mean for you 5 years. Are you in control of interest rates in your banking function, and having control of the cash flow? And then what you just told me, that you think tax rates will be higher in the future. And, if you're going to have 500,000, $1 million in a tax deferred 401k plan, they told you were going to be in a lower bracket and you just said you didn't believe you were. Might there be a better way to build your wealth and net worth and take control of some things today that nobody's ever talked to you about before?
Yeah. And you've gone, I mean, like you said, you've gone the full gamut. Like you've lived the problem. You've found an answer. And today, you've implementing the solution, not just for yourself, but other members and clients. And I think that process of aligning, like you said, their habits with their thoughts, because a lot of people, their habits and their thoughts are not in alignment. And that's that friction. And that friction creates a lot of those uncertainties, and uncertainties lead to fear. And if you're in a
Right.
married household and you have uncertainties and fear, what's that lead to? Arguments, and arguments
Mhm.
about money. And those arguments about money can exacerbate other issues of your life. And I really like the way that you help people understand that connection between habits and thoughts. And if more people, our listeners, are out there doing the same thing, how do you see the future? Think about it. 10, 15, 20 years from now. Are your current habits today aligning with where you believe we're going to be in the future? We don't really talk too much about the features and benefits of infinite banking, but we understand that it gives you back control, right? You're becoming your own banker. You're
Right.
recapturing interest. You're building wealth. I mean, there's just so many other fantastic features and benefits. Just pick up the book, Becoming Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash. It's 92 pages. It's like $13, $20 or so on Amazon. It will literally change your life. So if you haven't read the book, we're going to encourage you, pick up the book and just start there with 92 simple pages.
And if it
Yep.
doesn't change your life after you read it, you can reach out to me and I'll buy it back from you. Okay, I'll buy
Exactly.
it back from you and I'll buy it
Yeah.
back at $10 more than whenever you paid. Okay. Like
Right.
literally, I believe that much in what is taught in that book because it is all about rethinking our thinking. Einstein
Yep.
has one of my favorite quotes where he says, "Hey, you got to understand the rules of the game, and then you can play better than everyone else." Well, guess what?
Hmm.
If you're following the herd, if you're going along with what people have been doing for generations now, right? Like there was just a great switch where all of a sudden everything's like, oh, we're not gonna take on the risk anymore. We're gonna transfer it to the people, and we just didn't know. No one said, hey, everyone, you're getting all the risk because we weren't curious, like Scott, to say, okay, what's happening here? Let me dig into this and let me read a little bit deeper because we weren't asking different questions.
Mhm.
And to that point, I believe that every answer to every question we have can be found in the Bible. And in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul says, "Be ye not conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Think about what I just said. Be ye not conformed to the ways of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, that was written 2,000 years ago, long before this book right here was written, right? But it's the same thing. If you want the same results as everybody else, all you got to do is think, do, and behave and act like everybody else. But if you want different, you got to transform yourself by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of your mind means thinking differently. You don't have to, conformity as default mode. You don't have to do anything to be like everybody else, but you got
Mm.
to do differently to have different results. And Paul said that there. Like I said, be ye not conformed to the ways of this world. Well, he's telling you you're conforming without doing anything, but be transformed. But you actually have to you have to be intentional. It requires intentionality to have different results. And whether that's in our spiritual life, our financial life, our marital life, our family life, our physical life, whatever area of life it is, that verse out of Romans 12:2 pertains and covers it, because you got to do differently than everybody else.
That's
I
that's
love I
really,
Yeah.
yeah,
Go
that's
ahead,
really,
Jeremy.
really beautiful. And you know, you've broken free. You've have policies now that have been maturing, and you're operating outside of the system. Tell us, how are you going from what you were, big on business, $5, $6 million a year, lost everything, met Nelson Nash. resonated with you personally, spiritually, scripturally. You helped other people realign their actions with their future. And now you're implementing infinite banking pretty recently as well in your own personal life when it comes to starting a new business. You have two sons. You got Zeb working in the business with you on this side of the house.
Yep.
What about your other son and Magnolia Cotton? Can you tell us how you've used IBC to transition it into the next phase of life and setting up what we call them your G1? You got Zeb and Zeke as G2. Can you tell us how IBC is affecting generation two with your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, good question. So, yeah, my son Zeke, years ago when he was in high school, his sophomore year, he came to me, and Zeke was a straight A student, and he said, and went to the same little private school here in it, little independent school here in Sandersville that I went to, and he came to me in his sophomore year, said, "Daddy, I'm not so sure that I'm going to want to go to college when I graduate school," and I said, "Well, okay, but there's got to be a plan." And Zeke was a worker. He had worked, he had raised cows, he had grown produce. He had been working since he was 12 years old, made his own money to buy his own truck with when he turned 16. And he was prouder of that truck than all his friends whose mom and dad had bought their vehicle for him. And so, anyway, he graduated and sure enough didn't go to college. We had a plan. He opened up a screen printing business. And so I and a client of mine provided him the money at that time to buy screen printing equipment, and he understood what paying back the bank looked like because he paid us back. And so he just, he was 18 years old, had a traditional screen printing company, and that thing began to grow because people loved it. They remembered him as a 12-year-old, 14-year-old kid selling produce in town, and so they wanted to do business with the 18, 19-year-old kid that was starting a screen printing company. And so that grew to where within a couple of years, he bought his own building, moved into a 6,300 square foot building. He was actually operating in about 800 square feet of vacant space I had in the back of my office prior, when he started. So he bought a 6,300 square foot building, hired some employees, and had a pretty good big business going. And it grew over time. And when COVID shut the world down and everybody went crazy and went home, that affected his business as well. And he came to me and he said, "Daddy, what am I going to do to keep my business going?" Well, he's had a policy since he was 15, and there was some money there to lean on. But we got kind of creative, came up with some fundraiser ideas to do online that became very successful. And one of them was related to agriculture and helping some of the FFA, Future Farmers of America chapters in the state of Georgia, because we had a personal connection with a lady who's the state director of the FFA Foundation. And she loved the idea because they were really struggling financially because they couldn't go see their donors and hold their fundraiser events. So Zeke helped raise about $20,000 for them in about 90 days at the end of 2020. And from that, this idea, he said, "Okay, Daddy," and Zeke was 23 years old at that time. He said, "Daddy, if we're going to sell T-shirts that say we're supporting agriculture in Georgia, we need to be using T-shirts made out of cotton grown in Georgia because Georgia is the #2 cotton producing state in the country." And he said, "Nobody does that. There's no such animal out there. People have tried it and failed." And he said, "But we can make this work." I said, "Well, figure it out. Go to work, look and see." So that was the beginning of 21 maybe. And here we are 4 years later. And through some trial and error and some hiccups and some bumps in the road, some things that worked, some things that didn't work. Today, Magnolia Loom is the brand name, and it is now in its 4th year. Very successful T-shirt and apparel brand. So T-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, polos, all made out of Georgia grown cotton and being cut and sewn right here in Sandersville, Georgia. Now, I'll go back. All that was able to come together because of money I had in my policies, money Zeke had in his, as well as some other clients who loved what we were doing. And when I reached out to them, it took money to get that started going. I reached out to some of my clients, told them what the plan was, an idea, and they said, "How can we help?" And so had it not been for infinite banking and people having access to liquid capital, being able to control it, not having to ask for permission to access it, Magnolia Loom would have never gotten started in 2021, and it certainly would not be the magnitude of what it is today. And so now there's a company called Rally Apparel Co-op that is co-owned by my son Zeke and a business partner. right here in Sandersville, who just reopened a cutting and sewing facility in January of this year that was built in the 1940s. Here's a cool part of it. They are
Hmm.
literally in a building that was built in the 1940s as a cut and sew facility back then, and it was cut and sew in this country until the 90s when all those jobs were shipped overseas, and it's been warehouse space ever since then. And right now, as we talk, there are people sitting at sewing machines in there cutting and sewing garments, because because of the infinite banking concept having made some stuff possible years ago.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. Think of the possibility, listeners. Think about the possibility of not just bringing banking back to the you and me level, but bringing back the US to the you and me level, bringing back the economy to people working with people, supporting people, and an everyone thrives culture where it benefits everyone that's involved. That's what I heard. I heard
Yeah,
possibility that's infinite for where this can go in the future. And it's starting in
absolutely.
Is it Saunders, Georgia?
Sandersville,
Sandersville. Okay.
Sanders. Yep, Sandersville.
That is so cool. I had no
Yeah,
idea we get to learn that today.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
It's
that
really
kind of
cool.
that really, again, touching on points of previous episodes, giving resourcefulness, right? Not necessarily resources. Infinite banking and what you've done with your policies, what you've done with your children's policies, that resourcefulness of being an honest banker and learning good habits allowed this business to one get off the ground, but now totally it sounds like it's exploding. Like the sky's going to be the limit. When I met with you, you really kind of nailed it when you said infinite banking isn't about infinite returns, it's about infinite possibilities. And that's what you guys are doing right there. You're bringing America back to America.
That's right. Yep. We're adding value to local economies, that, and building creating jobs, and yeah, and like I said, had infinite banking not been there when Zeke had the idea for screen printing, then that may not have happened, and everything through that process may not have happened, and it wouldn't be where it is today, with the sky being the limit. So they don't only do Magnolia Loom, they do some pretty cool stuff in there. They make a lot of sports uniforms. Are you guys familiar with if you watch high school or NCAA or NFL football, sometimes you'll see them wearing these pads on the outside of the helmet. Now
Mm-hmm.
it's called a Guardian helmet, a Guardian cap. Well, the company that makes those is out of Norcross, Georgia. Well, Zeke's business partner, a lady named Tori, who literally physically closed her facility in Snellville, Georgia, and moved 8 tractor trailer loads of equipment here to Sandersville in December so they could merge their businesses. She has the only license in the U.S. to make helmet matching covers for those Guardian helmet covers. So now here in Sandersville, if you watch NFL, NCAA, or high school football, and they have those Guardian helmet pads on, and they have a helmet matching cover on it, it'll be made here in Sandersville, Georgia, at Rally Apparel Co-op, because that's the only place licensed in the United States to do it.
That's awesome. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you have a new grandbaby too, right? Zeb had a daughter.
I've had a daughter. She's a beautiful little girl, 13 weeks old now.
How are you
Congratulations.
planning G3? So you have all of these wonderful educational benefits and setting up your family for future success. What are you doing in terms of, education, financial IQ, but also the EQ side of the house? Like, what are you doing to set up multi-generation of bankers in your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nelson was a great example of that. As you guys know, when at the height of his policy ownership, I think it was 49 policies that Nelson owned, and owned them on everybody in his family. And before he died, he started giving those policies away to the people that he had written, that those policies had been written on: children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, great great grandchildren. And there's quite a family banking system established there today because of those actions of his. But he also taught the respect of money understanding how money even either works for you or against you through your life, and how I think it was Jason that alluded to earlier, how we've kind of we've forgotten our roles, or we've been misled to not understand our roles in the play, so to speak. And so I want my boys, and I kind of led by example. My boys have been around IBC now for 15 years. They both met Nelson. They both knew Nelson. They heard me talk about it over and over and over. So, it became a way of life. As Nelson used to say, once you get this and you understand and you implement it, it really does make for a peaceful, easy way of living. And so my boys knew about the policies we were building and how we used them. And I didn't beat them over the head with it. I just let them see it happening. And now both of them, have their own policies they're building for their families. We have policies on them. We're going to start a policy soon on our new granddaughter. And it's just a matter of teaching the family how to, like I said, either have money working for us or against us, and to respect that money, and not to love it, but to respect it in a manner that builds wealth and net worth for our futures, for generations yet to come. So to me, my goal is that to hopefully never need a relationship with a commercial bank again, except for a checking account or a high yield savings account to warehouse some money in while it's in transition from a policy to deploying it where it needs to go to. But yeah, it's just, sitting down and having those conversations, but more important, I think, leading by example.
That's a beautiful, beautiful shares today. And I think we went through a whole journey, right? From being an entrepreneur, working in the system, and being a borrower in the system, to bring it back to some of our other episodes. And now you're being a builder. You're doing it with purpose. You're doing it with intention. You're doing it with leadership. Like, again, to be a father in this country, right, is the 3 P's are to provide, to protect, and to procreate, to create. And creation takes thought. Creation takes courage. Creation takes faith in that you have a destination that you're going to. So to hear you going from being scared, afraid, not being able to afford gas and food, to go see Nelson, to where you are today. And it hasn't been that long. I mean, right? 15 plus years is not that long of a time to change everything in your family for generations to come. So anyone's listening, if you haven't started, if you haven't been there, don't hear people that are just bragging on where we've gone, what we've done. Hear the faith and the change and the certainty and the control that it's given each and every one of us that we're sharing this with you. So Scott, your message is awesome.
Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely. It's just my story, and on the NNI website, my bio has been the same since 2013, and it's just my story, and it's just who I am, and it tells people the real me, and that's what I believe is being genuine and letting people just know your story.
If our listeners wanted to connect with you, whether they're connecting with you because they resonate with your story or they want to learn more about your family business, where can they find you?
Yeah, good question. So, you can certainly reach out to me. We have a website, chapmanfinancial.net. You can go on chapmanfinancial.net, learn about us and connect with us there. Certainly give us a call. Phone numbers are on that website. And if you want to learn more about Magnolia Loom and what's happening there with Georgia Cotton, magnolialoom.com is the website there, and that'll tell you more about that story as well.
All right. Jason, you got anything else?
No, awesome episode, Scott. We really appreciate you coming and sharing. I know everyone listening, every time we're bringing, and you guys, we're always bringing new people that have been there, done that, so you can hear their journey. And it always starts with fear and uncertainty and doubt, but it also starts with the power of thinking differently and asking a better question. Like maybe if you say I don't have the resources, I would challenge you and just say you are not yet being resourceful enough.
Yeah. And I would always ask too, as compared to what? As compared to doing nothing, as compared to doing what I'm doing now. Just have those hard conversations with yourself. That's what I did, I mean, have those hard, honest conversations, because you got to give yourself an honest answer if you do it,
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is going to close out this episode. Mr. Chapman, we do appreciate you being on, and maybe we'll have you or Zeb or one of the other boys on a future episode.
And Jeremy, I can't believe he
Absolutely.
tricked us that we both got it wrong, man. That neither one of us got any points. Man, that's my ego. I was so certain that I was going to go one more up on you. So until you got to tune in next time to see who goes up in the count, Jeremy or me. So
Yeah, dodge another bullet. All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on WealthWise Banking. If today's episode inspired you, please subscribe, leave a review, and give us a like. It's a simple way to help others discover these empowering strategies and join our community. Together, we're building a network of people who believe financial freedom is within everyone's reach. Remember, financial independence is about making every dollar work for you, one step at a time. Until next time, stay inspired, stay in control, and keep building your legacy the wise way.